A cybernetic organism. Living tissue over a metal endoskeleton. An Austrian accent. A machine sent back in time to kill a resistance leader who hasn't even been born yet. And arguably the most iconic killer robot in movie history. That's the franchise pitch, but the question we always ask on this channel is different. Would the T-800 actually be any good as a weapon? Can you even build something like this in the real world? And if you could, would it work the way the films say it does? Let's start with the skeleton. According to the lore, the T-800 is a humanoid endoskeleton made from a titanium-based hyperalloy, and I want to flag this up front, not steel. I'm being specific because half the write-ups on the internet call it either titanium or steel interchangeably, and those are very different materials in terms of weight and mechanical properties. We're going with titanium hyperalloy as stated by the creators. Structurally, it's a fully upright biped, head, forelimbs, human proportions throughout. Movement is driven by hydraulic actuators standing in for muscles. The muscle contracts, pulls the bone, the joint rotates. Same basic logic as our own musculoskeletal system. And here's my first nitpick. Look closely at the T-800's hand, and you'll notice there's not much going on in there. The human hand has roughly 27 degrees of freedom and close to 30 muscles per palm alone. The Terminator gets a bundle of cables and a couple of cylinders. Walk, punch, grip a shotgun with both hands, yeah, it can handle that. Tie shoelaces, type a text message, not a chance. Fine motor control is completely absent, and honestly, you can see that just by looking at the design. Now, immune to small arms fire. This is where the movie is quietly lying to us, and I want to put that on the table. The endoskeleton isn't solid armor, it's an open lattice. There's mostly air between the structural elements. A bullet hitting that skeleton usually doesn't punch through it, it just flies clean between the ribs and actuators into empty space. So the T-800 isn't armored in any meaningful sense, it's just that there's nothing vital to hit in the torso. No heart, no lungs, no liver. What protects it isn't thick metal, it's the absence of organs. That's a subtle but important distinction for anyone thinking like an engineer. Hit a joint or an actuator and you will take it down, which is exactly what the films show. As for the locomotion itself, honestly I have the least to complain about here. A bipedal robot that runs confidently and stays balanced already exists. Boston Dynamics Atlas is basically proof of concept that a two-legged combat platform can walk, jump, and get back up after being shoved. So the idea of a walking chassis isn't science fiction. The T-800's real problems don't start with the legs, they start with what's powering them. And this is where the franchise starts actively lying. According to the lore, the T-800 runs on an iridium power cell, 120-year charge in standby, 60 years at full combat power. Sounds solid, except it's physically impossible. Problem 1. Iridium isn't a reactor. It's not a fissile material. You cannot sustain a chain nuclear reaction in it. So the whole miniature nuclear reactor thing is just marketing copy. The most physics actually allows in that volume is a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, basically the same tech that powers the Voyager probes and used to show up in plutonium-238 pacemakers. A warm chunk of isotope that bleeds off electricity. What's the problem? Power output. The RTG on Curiosity puts out around 110 watts. 110. That's enough to drive a rover across Mars at walking pace. Now figure out the power draw of a 200 kilogram, 440 pounds, hydraulic machine sprinting after Sarah Connor, punching through concrete walls, and lugging a minigun. A peak output human athlete is around 1 to 1.5 kilowatts. A combat hydraulic robot needs several times that. We're not talking hundreds of watts, we're talking kilowatts, plural. The math is simple. Either you've got the 110 watt source and the 60-year runtime, but then it barely shuffles. Or it moves like it does in the movies, but then forget 60 years, you're getting a few hours of combat use per charge. Both at once is pure fantasy. Problem 2, which the films just quietly swept under the rug, heat dissipation. Every power source generates heat. Every hydraulic system generates heat. A lot of heat. And then remember, we wrapped this scorching machine in flesh, which is, it turns out, an excellent thermal insulator. So Skynet built a kilowatt space heater and lovingly swaddled it in a down blanket. Without active cooling, a T-800 would either fry its own electronics or slow cook its organic disguise into something resembling a doner kebab within a couple of hours. And here, this is the part I actually love, the sweating that everyone makes fun of suddenly makes complete sense. Sweat is evaporative cooling exactly like in humans. If I were Skynet, I wouldn't frame that as a camouflage feature. I'd call it thermoregulation, full stop. The robot sweats because otherwise it overheats. Unexpectedly elegant, you have to admit. To wrap this section honestly, building a compact power source that has long runtime and delivers combat level output and doesn't cook its host, we cannot do that today. Like most sci-fi tech, from jetpacks to the Iron Man suit, the T-800 trips over exactly this. It's the one real unfixable flaw, and no amount of titanium makes it go away. Depending on your source, the T-800 weighs anywhere from 110 kilograms, 240 pounds, with the flesh suit to a full metric ton. We can immediately drop the ton. That's absurd. A 1-ton infiltrator breaks human infrastructure just by showing up. No elevator in the building will move it. Any motorcycle it mounts will fold in half, and every wooden staircase becomes kindling. Some infiltrator. My best estimate is 110 to 180 kilograms, 240 to 400 pounds. At that weight, the problems mostly disappear, except not every bike would handle it. And here's a detail that gets overlooked. It's not just total weight that matters, it's ground pressure. 440 pounds on 2 boot soles means noticeable floor pressure. On soft ground or hardwood, this thing leaves impressions deep enough to take plaster molds from. Small detail, but for an infiltrator, it's a real hit to the cover. The vision system, for what it's worth, is actually solid. It's not just infrared the way the red tinted shots imply, it has a full suite of modes it can switch between situationally. Overall, if I set aside the power problem, I don't have many complaints about the endoskeleton itself. The chassis concept is both realistic and functional, but then we get to the meat of it. Literally, Skynet didn't invent living skin because it wanted to, it did it because it had to. The early attempts to fake a human appearance over metal were a disaster. The T-600 had rubber skin, and people made it from across the street. Model 101 went further. Real living tissue, sweat, breath, blood circulation through a pump, heart, wounds that close, hair that grows. The perfect undercover assassin. And this is where the biologist in me has to speak up. Because healing, hair growth, and a functioning metabolism aren't firmware features. That's biology. And biology runs on oxygen and nutrients. The pump circulates blood. Fine. But what oxygenates that blood? Where are the lungs? What delivers the glucose and amino acids that let skin cells divide and hair follicles produce hair? Where's the stomach, the liver, the kidneys? You end up with a fork in the road. Either the tissue is genuinely alive, in which case it needs a complete set of life support organs the endoskeleton doesn't have room for, or it's prop meat. In which case it shouldn't heal or grow hair, it should just rot, like any chunk of flesh without blood flow. The film wants both at the same time. That's a pure fantasy premise, and I'm calling it that honestly. Let's just bracket it off and assume Skynet solved biochemistry that we haven't. Otherwise, there's nothing left to analyze. The fan complaint, why is the infiltrator a jacked bodybuilder, actually has a clean answer. The T-800's muscles are cosmetic layering over the actuators. And those actuators, especially around the shoulders, are huge. To hide them, you need a lot of bulk on top, hence the physique. Making a smaller model, say 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters, doesn't work. First, the actuators still need to be covered. A shorter Terminator would have to be either fat or jacked anyway, otherwise the pistons would show through the skin. Second, smaller frame means thinner load-bearing elements, and that makes the chassis brittle. The T-800 ends up in open brawls in every film, so structural integrity is non-negotiable. Skynet runs the numbers and keeps the build. It tracks. Now, how does the crowd read a guy that size? On one hand, a 110 kilogram, 240 pounds, man at close to 6 feet 3 inches, 190 centimeters, is noticeable. On the other, Arnie isn't some freak anomaly. He's just a very large, well-built guy. Above average proportions, but not off the charts. He doesn't cause panic on the street. The face gets covered by sunglasses. Not just a cool look, but a practical disguise decision. Half the face disappears. He's much harder to match to a description, especially if he changes clothes and lets the hair grow out, which, as we established, the 101 model can actually do. And here's the best part, the detail the films never say out loud. The T-800's AI runs in read-only mode. It executes hard-coded protocols. Memory isn't unlimited, the protocol library is finite. You can switch it to self-learning mode, but as we know from the second film, self-learning comes bundled with free will. And a Terminator with free will might eventually decide that completing Skynet's mission is, optional. Skynet can't have that, so the option gets disabled before deployment. The result? A decision-limited Terminator walking around in human society reads as a dim but intimidating guy. And that, as it turns out, is perfect cover. People run on heuristics. Big, built, talks in short sentences, must be a simple dude. Nobody is rushing to pick a fight with him either. Not worth it. Skynet accidentally turned a limitation into a feature. A restricted AI is less likely to blow the mission, and it doesn't need to come across as intelligent. Brilliant systems design. The one thing I'll actually call out on the disguise front, the T-800 speaks through a speaker while moving its lips in sync, basically lip syncing. And that is what would burn the cover faster than anything else. Human speech comes from the vocal cords, riding a column of air from the lungs. The voice resonates through the chest. It sounds alive. A speaker sitting behind the teeth can't do that. No breath, no chest movement synced to speech, no warm exhale. And recall the heat discussion from earlier. On a thermal imager, that talking head doesn't glow like a face, it glows like a running piece of electronics. So yes, the lip movement looks convincing, but anyone paying close attention, or any instrument, is going to notice something's off. Can we actually build a T-800? The chassis? Partly yes. A bipedal running frame already exists, thank you Boston Dynamics. As a complete system, no. And the blocker isn't imagination, it's physics. No compact power source that's both long-lived and combat capable. No solved heat management. Self-healing biological skin without internal organs is biologically impossible. These are honest, hard limits. Would it work as an infiltrator the way the films show? As a direct combat unit in an open fight? Excellent. As a spy? The idea of walking around in Arnie's face in a post-apocalyptic world has a shelf life of maybe 2 encounters. One survivor with a photo and a radio, and every garrison knows the face. Stick a metal detector at the shelter entrance and the whole infiltrator concept evaporates. So build it, sure. Use it exactly as shown. That part's a stretch. But here's the thing, as an evolutionary stepping stone, the T-800 is genuinely impressive. It's an honest intermediate model. Rough, runs hot, has a speaker where a throat should be, and then T-1000 shows up and behaves incomparably more like a human. Progress, if you can call it that. On our scale, that's a solid 6 iridium cells out of 10. Strong concept, execution trips on power and heat. That's the call.